When talking about influential studios within the first-person shooter genre, a few come to mind. id Software, who basically invented the entire genre. Valve, for delivering a masterfully crafted experience with an interesting new way to convey a story. And then, there's Bungie. The studio gained a niche following with the Marathon series, and struck it big with the massively successful Halo franchise. It pioneered and refined how shooters should be played on consoles, and almost every shooter that came after it used Halo as a blueprint for their mechanics. After 9 years of Halo, the studio delivered their swan song for the series with Halo Reach, and set off to a bright and exciting new future. For years, the studio kept quiet, until roughly 4 years later, Bungie revealed the fruit of their labor named Destiny. The initial release garnered quite some criticism from both the public and critics alike. But now, after all expansions are released and numerous updates, is Destiny still deserving of the flag it got, or are its flaws ironed out?
We may want to move back. Well, you've been dead a long time. So you're going to see a lot of things you won't understand.
Every aspect of the game reeks of Bungie, and the narrative certainly is no exception. But while the studio's previous titles like Halo and Marathon had straightforward plots with lots of expanded lore and backstories to flesh out their universes, Destiny's format doesn't really allow for that. The game likes to pretend that its story is self-contained, and while the main plotline certainly is, everything around it isn't. There is no setup for locations, species, or events in-game, which will leave most players wondering what actual reason they should have to invest and immerse themselves into this world. What the game gives you is an extremely rough and fairly cryptic summary of the main premise. At some point in time, a giant planetary body known as the Traveler arrived at Earth, and brought with it a golden age for mankind. Humanity rapidly evolved, and the Traveler made every planet it crossed colonizable. Things didn't last, as the Traveler was followed by an unknown force named the Darkness, which sends humanity into an era of despair and fear. The game handles this as a footnote and never actually highlights or complements these events as much as it should. The game's actual main plot revolves around the player being resurrected after several years by a fragment of the Traveler, and personal assistant to the player simply known as a ghost. These ghosts have been going around and resurrecting several deceased people as guardians, protectors of the giant floating orb with the ability to wield the light. From there on, you set out on a journey to destroy something called the Heart of the Black Garden. This is all delivered in a very sloppy way, and before the player even knows what's actually going on, they will have reached the end of their supposed epic adventure. The game's main plot is about as interesting as a blank piece of paper. Throughout the game, players will collect items called Grimoire cards, which act as the game's Bible or encyclopedia. But the problem is that players had to go visit Bungie's website to learn anything about the lore, which isn't even possible anymore since Bungie removed the page from the site and this info can't be found anywhere else in the game. Many players won't even bother learning any of the lore or important events in the game, since it's a hassle to do so. It's pretty clear that the story for Destiny was heavily butchered for the final product.
I don't even have time to explain why I don't have time to explain. I will.
If you were hypothetically thrown into the middle of a mission in Destiny, it would seem there are no problems with the game. The gameplay mechanics themselves feel great, amazing even. Fights are incredibly engaging, and playing with friends is not only a must, but makes the experience all the better. The actual combat is strong enough to keep players engaged for a long time. Players can pick one of 3 classes, with each 2 subclasses. There's the Titan, who focuses on defense and raw fighting skill. The Hunter, which is fast and quick with a blade, and Warlocks, acting as the game's magic users. Subclasses have their own unique melee and grenade abilities, along with a super move. Players can switch to one of their subclasses at any point, and can upgrade the abilities of those classes to fit their playstyle. Each subclass gets 1 super and melee ability, and 3 grenade types along with some more specific abilities. The first flaws start popping up here, as players will have to follow a strict path in each subclass, instead of letting them choose which attributes they want, effectively changing a skill tree into a skill vine going in one straight direction. While gear is unique to each class, weapons are not. There are 3 weapon groups, each with their own weapon type, and within those types a myriad of variations. Heavy weapons are the game's power weapons, which include rocket launchers and machine guns. These do major damage, but ammo is scarce, Special weapons are reserved for special occasions and include shotguns, snipers, and the energy-based fusion rifles. Additionally, sidearms were added in the House of Wolves update. Lastly, there are the main weapons, which are meant to be your go-to weapon and include revolvers, auto rifles, single-shot scout rifles, and 3 burst pulse rifles. And all of these weapons have loads of varying designs and perks within each type. Only 1 weapon can be equipped per type, and up to 9 extra weapons can be in the player's inventory for every type. This means that players are fairly limited in what weapons they can use at one time. Options like using a sniper rifle and shotgun at the same time or an auto and pulse rifle is out of the cards. Players can't also quickly swap out one weapon in the same category, and instead have to go to the inventory and manually swap out the weapon and return to the game. It's fairly limiting, but players that might have an initial problem with it will probably learn to roll with it pretty fast. Once they do, they can choose to do one of 5 mission types. Patrol missions allow players to do simple objectives in one of the 4 big and open-ended spaces to level up their gear, weapons, and player level, or to collect more loot. While in this area, public events might trigger, which challenge players to complete difficult tasks or fights to receive special gear. Story missions start off in these open levels, but send the player to a more traditional straightforward level for narrative reasons. Most of these missions end with a simple boss or a wave of enemies to fend off. The problem with the story missions is that players mainly just run from point A to B, killing everything they meet, and then defending their ghost. Some objective variety would have been nice, but the solid gameplay keeps it from becoming tedious. Strikes lie somewhere in between story missions and raids. A group of 3 must complete a dungeon which culminates in 1 or even multiple big boss battles. The strikes the game offers aren't all too different from the story missions, with all the same flaws and strengths. Raids are a different story. A group of 6 players have to go through a dungeon in which they have to solve combat puzzles. Sometimes the game gives players challenges outside of combat, like platforming or stealth. Raids have unique mechanics, and it's up to players to figure out what they need to do. These are certainly the highlights of the cooperative missions. Every mission can be played with friends or strangers. Lastly, there's the Crucible, Destiny's competitive multiplayer. All the usual suspects are here. Deathmatch, territories, kill confirmed, and more, with little variations in several playlists. Ammo rules are a bit different here. Players start off with primary ammo, but have to collect special ammo from crates all across the map, that periodically gives a handful of munition, and if the player dies, they lose all that ammo. Halfway into the match, 2 crates with heavy ammo will spawn, so it's a mad dash to get to the ammo first or take out the players who just opened said boxes. The maps are masterfully crafted, in both aesthetics and layout. The studio's previous titles have such an in-depth game type editor, letting players almost do anything, so it's kinda disappointing to see them ignore this aspect completely. The playlists are limited and rotate every week, meaning if you want to do a certain game type, you will just have to wait until it shows up and play what's being offered. The main problem doesn't lie with Destiny's gameplay, because that's solid, but it's a bunch of elements like the linear skill path or the inability to trade weapons that tend to drag down the experience.
It was better off in the prison of elders. I'll contact the Vanguard. Let them know the Archon prison.
Destiny's art style is absolutely impeccable. The game mixes a future sci-fi setting with themes and designs seen in the classical fantasy genre. There are a lot of armor pieces that implement knight and wizard designs, and enemies are all named after classic monsters one would encounter in a game of Dungeons and Dragons. It makes for a unique looking depiction of 2 settings often overused. Enemy designs are top notch as well. Every species has their own distinguishable design, like the Hive, with their black and green Giger-inspired interiors, or the Vex, with lots of red, rounded and robotic features. This is of course further implemented in the worlds the players will visit. These worlds all look amazing, breathtaking even, with things like the Cabal's military installations or the Fallen's smugglers' cave areas. As is another staple of Bungie, menus and UIs are clean, tight and easy to navigate. The art style and aesthetic are amazing, but by far the best part of the presentation is the music. Marty O'Donnell has really outdone himself here. The score has amazing sweeping orchestral pieces, similar to the Halo games. The main Halo team might never be trumped, but what's on offer here manages to surpass most of O'Donnell's previous works. Soft melodic tracks and epic scored tunes with awe-inspiring vocals will always leave the player entranced. Bungie certainly delivers a tight, beautiful package as far as presentation goes.
You need to see this.
Destiny is difficult to pin down. Its mechanics are stellar, and the actual fighting, jumping, and shooting are a real treat. The game looks beautiful, with creative and unique designs for the worlds and the creatures crawling in it. The music is absolutely incredible, with sweeping orchestral tracks and soothing quiet tunes, fitting the abandoned planet's Guardian's visit. But then there are other things, like the narrative being poorly delivered, and having to go outside of the game to learn the important lore. There are a lot of problems as well with the game's systems. Destiny copies a lot of elements from other games, but it only does it half-assed. It copies these features, but leaves out essential elements, which cause frustrating issues. Things like the lack of communication with other players, the inability to trade or give weapons and gear, or the limited selection of multiplayer game types can cause players to get annoyed. It's a game that likes to tout itself as an MMO, until it's expected to have features common in the genre. At which point it just pretends to be a fun co-op romp with friends. But despite that, for all the problems the game has, it manages to keep pulling you back in. Which makes it all the more frustrating that these problems keep the game from reaching its full potential. Alright, that's another review done. This one would have been done months ago, maybe even half a year if it wasn't for my previous school buddy kind of fucking me over and being like, hey, halfway through the game I suddenly don't want to play the game anymore. I played it too much and I don't want to play anymore, and yeah, figure it out. And he just kind of left me hanging, and I went looking for new people to play with, and then a good friend of mine, Elvar, came along and was like, you know what, I'm willing to try this Destiny thing. I've never played it. He didn't even have a copy, and he went out, got a copy, and we played it in co-op. It was tremendously fun, and I'm glad he enjoys the game as much as he does. So yeah, just want to give a shout out to Elvar, because goddamn, that's you're the real MVP of this entire situation. Thanks a lot for helping me out. And while my co-op buddy kinda screwed me over, he did provide me with some extra footage that I needed, so I am grateful for that, so thank you. I also quickly want to thank the people who helped with the raid. That was incredibly fun. That was so much fun to go through and explore and finish that raid. That was like, thanks for that. That was incredibly fun. And I hope to do the other raids with you guys, and eventually maybe even Destiny 2 or other games. We'll see. Yeah, thanks for that experience. Once I get to the DLC, I'll do reviews of those as well, so you guys can check those out once I do those expansions. And I'll see you guys then.